Rock Hill and the world, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on what time you're watching this. Welcome to another Rock Hill video with your host, Chris Corrado. Today we have on Mark Charles. He is the independent running for president, so I reached out to his campaign and asked him to jump on here and talk to us for a little bit and learn more about what he's looking to do and learn more about him. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Chris. It's good to be with you today.
Great. Thank you. We're so excited to have you on. Basically, just first question I wanted to ask you. We want to learn a little bit more about you, your background, family life, business life. What would you like to share with our viewers?
Yeah, let me first start just by introducing myself. So, Mark Charles Dinesh, Simba Kadenet and Muslim to Tohi Baschi, Simba Kadenet Dasacheda to Chini Dasanella. In our Navajo culture, when you introduce yourself, you always give your four clan. We're matrilineal as a people with our identities from our mother's mother. Now, my mother's mother is American of Dutch heritage, and that's why I say Simba Kadenet. Translated loosely, that means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Tohiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Simba Kadenet. And my fourth clan, my father's father, is Toruchini. That's the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. I also just want to acknowledge I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and these are the lands of the Piscataway. So the Piscataway Nation are the people that lived here, they hunted here, they fished here, they raised their families here, they buried the dead here. This is the nation that was here long before Columbus got lost at sea. And this is the nation that was removed from these lands so the District of Columbia, the state of Maryland, the state of Virginia could be established. And I like to acknowledge the people whose land I'm on no matter where I go. And so I want to make sure I honor the Piscataway people, and I thank them for their stewardship of these lands. I am as I say in my campaign, I'm a dual citizen of the United States and the Navajo Nation. I grew up in a border town to the Navajo Reservation and attended school in Southern California at the University of California, Los Angeles, where I got my history degree, my bachelor's in history. And I lived with my wife, who I also met at UCLA. We met there and got married 2 years afterwards, and we lived on our reservation among my people for about 11 years. We really want to understand, because I grew up in a border town, I really want to understand the situation that my people lived in. And so for 3 years, we lived in a very remote section of our reservation. We lived out in the middle of nowhere. We were 6 miles off the nearest paved road on a dirt road. We were in a small one-room hogan in a sheep camp. Our neighbors were rug weavers and shepherds. We had no running water, no electricity in that community. And we lived there for 3 years. We also lived on another part of our reservation for another 8 years, which was not as far off the grid, but still off on a dirt road, still a little bit much more rural than most of the U.S., and raised our kids there. Our son, who was born just before we moved back to the reservation, he attended a Navajo immersion school for 6 years there. Our daughters also attended the same school where they were taught in an immersion environment in the Navajo language. And it was a wonderful experience for me to have my children, even though I was not raised speaking my language and I was not raised understanding my culture, my children were able to be raised speaking our language and to have a first-hand understanding of our culture and even of our nation's oral history. And so that was a gift I was very grateful that I could provide for my kids, even though I didn't know what to teach to them, but in our environment, in our community, in our schools there. And it was an invaluable experience and even a great space of training for the work I'm doing now, which is trying to bring our nation to wrestle with its history and become something it's never been before, which is to be a nation where we the people actually means all the people.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. That was definitely interesting to learn more about how you grew up. That was great. Thank you for sharing that. Growing up as a kid, I learned, you heard the term pilgrims and Indians, and as I got older, I learned Native American, and once again, as I've gotten older, I've heard the term indigenous peoples. How do you refer to yourself as? What makes more sense?
So Whenever possible, I use the actual name of the nation. The Navajo Nation, the Cherokee Nation, the Creek Nation, the Lakota people, the Dakota. I will, whenever possible, use the name of the people who I'm referring to or who I'm talking with. I also will use the term Native American when talking generally, and when talking in terms of treaties and more legally, I'll use the term used in the treaties, which is American Indian. Even though American Indian is not what we would use for ourselves, it is the name that the government uses in most treaties, and we will refer to ourselves or refer to our land as Indian country. So Indian is, while it's not the most widely accepted name, it's still used very frequently, both in Native circles and in some legal circles. So I'll use American Indian frequently when I'm talking about treaty rights or when I'm talking about, even there was a Supreme Court case just a few weeks ago that came out, I'll use that term. But most often I'll use the name of the nation that I'm speaking directly with or to, or I'll use either Native American or Indigenous peoples. That I use them both fairly interchangeably.
Got it, thank you. A few years back I saw this meme. It had Mount Rushmore in the background, and then in front of it, numerous different Native Americans, and the verbiage was the first founding fathers. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to acknowledge, just as I did when I started this interview, the people whose land I'm on. I wrote a book, published a book about 7 months ago. It's titled Unsettling Truth, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery. And so one of the mythologies of American history is that Columbus, Europeans, discovered these lands. And the first sentence in the book says you cannot discover lands already inhabited. You can steal those lands, you can conquer those lands, you can colonize those lands, you can't discover them unless you first dehumanize the people who live there. And so this is where our Declaration of Independence becomes so troubling, because while we say we're founded on this document that declares all men are created equal, but 30 lines later it refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. What this demonstrates is that the reason our the founding fathers of the United States used that inclusive term all men, because they had a very narrow definition of who was actually human. And so this makes the Declaration of Independence a systemically racist or white supremacist document. And so to acknowledge that, yeah, these lands were not discovered, the people who are carved into the sacred mountain of the Lakota, they were white supremacists and even genocidal men. Abraham Lincoln was a blatant white supremacist. And he actually ethnically cleansed the states of Minnesota, Colorado, and the territory of New Mexico to make way for the Transcontinental Railway, literally making him one of the most genocidal presidents in the history of our nation. And yet his face was carved into the sacred mountain that was stolen from the Lakota people. A story that most people aren't even aware of is that after the U.S. stole those lands and carved those faces into Mount Rushmore, they actually went back and tried to buy those lands from the Lakota and set millions and millions of dollars aside in a monetary fund. That monetary fund has since grown to about $1 billion. And the Lakota people have said, you can't pay us for these mountains. They're not for sale. You can't, there's no economic price that you can give us for these mountains. I think that's a wonderful teaching moment for this very young, somewhat naive nation that sees everything in economic terms. And the indigenous peoples, the host people of this land, are trying to teach them that, just like we said at Standing Rock, you can't drink oil, water is life. They're trying to teach this nation that, yeah, not everything has a monetary price tag. And the mountain you carved these faces in is not for sale. You cannot pay them for us. You can give them back to us. We'll take that. But we're not going to let you buy them from us or pay them for us. There's no price tag that you could afford that we would even put on it that you could give for us. So, yeah, I do my best to acknowledge that these lands were not discovered. And there were people here long before Columbus got lost at sea. And we would do well as a nation to honor and acknowledge and respect those peoples who were here prior.
Thank you, Mark. For the most part in our country, we have a two-party system, Democrat, Republican. You've chosen to run as an independent. Please share why you decided to do that.
I ran as an independent because I was determined I didn't want to run a protest campaign. I actually wanted to win. I wanted to be president. And had I run as an independent, I probably would have run as a Democrat. I definitely would have been more known. People would have seen me. I would have made it into some of the early debates. I would have definitely raised more money. But I never would have won. I never would have been nominated. What most people are not aware of, well, maybe they are, but in 1972, just after the Civil Rights Movement, where people of color gained greater access not only to the voting booth, but actually to the ballot box, where we could actually run for office and vote for people in office. And after the assassination of Dr. King and at the 68 Democratic Convention, there were actually a lot of violent protests that took place. This was the first year that, civil rights movements were definitely on the table, and there were more people of color involved in the process. And in response to that, the Democratic Party decided in 72 that their first convention, or their first primary in 72, would be held in the state of Iowa. Now, Iowa is the sixth whitest state in the country, and it has the highest percentage of private lands of any state in the Union. The first primary is held in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is the fourth whitest state in the country, and they have the highest percentage of land ownership. Iowa literally has a state law stating they have to be the first caucus state, and New Hampshire has a state law stating they have to be the first primary state. And both parties, Republicans and Democrats, adhere to those state laws, which means they allow white landowning men to be the gatekeeper for presidential politics. So this is why in the Democratic Party this year, we have the most diverse pool of candidates ever seen in our nation. More women, more people of color, more people from the LGBTQ community in running for president. And but they had to campaign for a year in Iowa and New Hampshire for white landowning men. And so almost all of the people of color were removed from the debate stage prior to the first primary. Andrew Yang was the only one left, and he was removed soon after that. And then all the women were removed fairly soon after that as well. And so now, even though we had this incredibly diverse pool of candidates, we are left with Joe Biden, who even his own wife, Jill, acknowledged early in the campaign that her husband was not as good on many of the issues as the other candidates were. But he was the one most likely to win. Why? Because they had to go through white landowning men, and Joe was absolutely the safest candidate for white landowning men. And so again, had I run as a Democrat, I would have been in some of the primary, or in some of the debates. I would have raised more money, but like every other person of color, I would now be removed from the stage. So I ran for an independent because I actually wanted to be a part of the general election. I actually wanted to be on the stage yet when we have a Democratic nominee, a Republican nominee, and whatever third-party nominees were out there. I wanted to actually run for president. And I knew the only way I would get there is if I ran not as a Democrat or Republican, but as an independent. And so that's what I'm doing. And now, like I said, Cory Booker's out, Kamala Harris is out, Julian Castro is out, all the other people of color are out. I may not be as well known, I may not have as much money, but I'm still in the race. And I still have a chance to become president. I have a much greater chance than Cory Booker or Kamala Harris has, because I'm still in the race.
Yes, sir. Thank you. What would you say are some common misconceptions about you and your stances, if any?
So a lot of people think that, I talk a lot about our foundations. I talk a lot about the Constitution and Supreme Court case law. I talk a lot about the doctrine of discovery. And people think I don't have much to say on policy. And that's not true. I actually have some very specific things I want to say about policy, but because our nation has never dealt with its foundations, when you have a house, okay, and you have a house and the foundations are bad, as a result, your drywall is cracking, you have gaps in your windowsills, and your floor is crooked, and it's not very stable. So you can have a lot of debate over what color to paint your newly plastered walls, what kind of caulking to use in your windows, and what kind of carpet to put on your floor, right? You can have a very robust debate about those things, but until you fix the foundations, you're never going to get the house in shape. And so we have never dealt with our foundations. We have a constitution that it starts with these inclusive terms. We hold these truths to be self-evident. No, we have this constitution that begins with "We the people of the United States." But if you read just a few lines later, down to Article 1, Section 2, you'll see, A, they never mention women. They specifically exclude natives, and they count Africans as 3/5 of a person. If you read our 13th Amendment, you'll find we've actually never abolished slavery. What it says is neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party has been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So we didn't abolish slavery, we redefined and codified it under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. And so today, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are having a very robust debate about criminal justice reform. And they're proposing what kind of chokeholds we can use and where we should shoot people. Should we shoot them in the kneecaps or in the chest? And whether we're talking about funding and how we're going to fund or defund the police. And I'm telling people, if we want to truly reform our criminal justice system, which is literally killing black and brown men and women, like we saw in Minnesota, we have to start by abolishing slavery. We have to start by removing this constitutional protection for the institutionalized white supremacy that we put into our criminal justice system through the 13th Amendment. Now, neither Joe Biden nor Donald Trump are interested in talking about that kind of reform. And so this is where, yes, I'm not going to come out and say what kind of chokeholds we should use right now. I'm not going to come out and say this is what we need to do with this issue. I'm going to say we have to fix the foundation. We have to deal with what is the root of the problem. Another example of that is my hair. I tie my Navajo bun. This is my CA. It's my Navajo bun, and it's tied with red yarn. The reason I tie it with red yarn is because of a crisis in Indian country known as missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. It's a crisis where literally every year we have hundreds, sometimes even thousands of Indigenous women and girls that go missing. They're reported as missing or as murdered by their families to law enforcement. And not only are most of their cases never closed, in many instances, hundreds of them, they're not even open. The families are literally told by law enforcement, you have to go search for them yourselves. We're not going to do anything about this. Nothing happens. They just go missing and they get reported and nothing happens. It's a crisis in Indian country. And at the Franklin Mayer Native American Presidents Forum that I attended last August, Bernie Sanders was there, Elizabeth Warren was there, Kamala Harris was there, Lynn Kasha was there. 10 of the Democratic candidates were there. I was there. And they asked the candidates about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And most of the candidates said that they would propose a new law, they would propose some new policy to protect this vulnerable demographic. Which sounds good, right? But I hold that if your Declaration of Independence calls natives savages, and your Constitution never mentions women, you probably shouldn't be surprised when your Indigenous women go missing or get murdered and society or the institutions don't care. A new law isn't going to fix the problem. The problem is the basis for our laws. We want to address the problem of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We have to deal with our foundations. So these are the kind of points I bring up in my campaign a lot, which is most people are not willing to talk about the foundational issues. They really want to talk about what color to paint the walls, and they don't want to deal with the broken foundations and the broken plumbing and everything that's going on underneath the house.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I like the foundation you use. My mother always talked to me about that. You know, as a child, it's kind of like that's your foundation for your house, and as you grow older, if you don't have a solid foundation, it's just all going to crumble. So I really like and appreciate that. Cool. So as we know, Joe Biden is a Democrat running for president. Donald Trump is the Republican trying to get reelected. And obviously they have their core bases, and people can vote for Biden, people can vote for Trump. Then there's a lot of people in the middle that they're going to try to go after. What would you say you would try to do to go after more Democrats and Republicans to try to get them on your side?
So right now, we have a very, I guess I even call it a toxic political environment. And because we've had this very simplistic two-party system for most of our nation's life, every issue becomes binary, right? And we've pretty much lost our ability to compromise. We've lost our ability to nuance things. We've lost our ability to have any real debate or discussion on issues. Everything is binary, and you're pretty much told you have to love or hate whatever the two parties put out. And this does not help us deal with the complex issues that our nation and the world is facing. Most issues are not binary. They require debate, they require nuance, they require compromise, they require understanding. They're not simple and they're not binary. And yet that's primarily the only debate that we have. And so what I've tried to do and what I'm doing, when I announced my campaign in May of 2019, we released a 9-minute announcement video. It's on our website. If you go to our website, markcharles2020.com, we have a 9-minute announcement video. I regularly, 14 months later, get emails from people profusely thanking me for this video, saying they actually feel hope for the first time about our nation's political system. This video talks about the challenges we're facing at a foundational level. It talks about our need to create what I call common memory. It talks about how we can heal from this very racist and sexist and white supremacist history that we're standing on. It addresses the issues that we're actually dealing with today with the racism, the institutionalized white supremacy, the pandemic that was going on right now and how it's affecting especially communities of color and more marginalized people. And people feel this sense of hope when they watch that video. Now, Donald Trump is a very divisive man. There's no other way to say it. He is divisive. And he knows how to fire up his base, and he does it, and he takes everything and makes it personal. Everything to him becomes a personal threat or affirmation to him as a person. And then he uses that to motivate or to quell his base. And so he is a very extremely divisive person. And Joe Biden's biggest campaign promise is that he's not Donald Trump. Joe Biden doesn't have vision. He's just the antithesis to Donald Trump. And so people are looking at these things, and Democrats are being told they have to vote blue no matter who. And even though they had a very diverse pool of candidates a year ago, they picked the most bland, uninspiring, institutionalized one of all of them and said he's going to be our candidate. And the Republicans, whether you love him or hate him, Donald Trump is very divisive. And so when people hear my campaign video that has vision, it talks about building a nation where for the very first time, we the people means all the people. It talks about not minimizing or marginalizing or dismissing our past, but creating a common memory, a space that can actually lead to healthier communities. And I get messages almost daily from people, some even saying they're in tears, having watched my video and for the first time in a long time feeling hope for our nation's political systems. And that's what I'm not appealing to Republicans or Democrats. I'm not appealing to the left or the right. I'm appealing to people. I'm appealing to Americans, and I'm trying to build a healthier community where we can have robust debate and even have differences, but still find a way together to move forward as a nation.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. So that's on markcharles2020.com, about a 9-minute video, you said?
Yeah, if you click on the announcement video, it's a link right from the very front page, and it's one of the best campaign tools we have to date.
Okay.
Again, people are still watching it daily, and I'm getting emails and messages. I just found your video. It's inspiring me. How come I've never heard of you before? So anyway, yeah, it's actually our best campaign tool that we have.
Outstanding. Okay. So what I'd like to go to next is a lot of times you'll hear people say, voting third parties are waste. This isn't the election to do it. What would you say to that person or those people?
Yeah, so again, people need to understand our nation has been using a very simplistic two-party system for almost its entire history. And the system is literally set up to maintain the status quo. Let me give you an example from a year ago. So in 2016, Donald Trump was running, right, to make America great again. That was his motto. When Hillary Clinton was clear she was going to be the nominee, she began telling her base that America's great already. In fact, in one of the debates, in one of the general election debates, Hillary Clinton expanded. She said, not only is America already great, but America's great because America's good. And Donald Trump stopped. He turned, he looked at her, and he said, I agree with her. I agree with everything she just said. But Donald wants to make America great again, and Hillary says America's great already. So they both agree our past, our history, our foundations are great. They disagreed if we were great in 2016. Donald said no, and Hillary said yes. Neither one of them are acknowledging the deep brokenness of our history and our foundations. The enslavement of African people, the genocide and ethnic cleansing of Native peoples, the huge disparities in income, the huge disparities in just civil rights and treatment of people. Neither of them are acknowledging those things. See, in my I gave a TEDx talk about maybe a year and a half ago. It's called "We the People: The 3 Most Misunderstood Words in U.S. History." And I lay out how this doctrine of discovery, this series of papal bulls from the 1400s, gets embedded into the foundations of our nation. And in 1823, through a court case, Johnson versus McIntosh, it gets identified. The doctrine of discovery becomes the legal precedent for land titles in an opinion written by John Marshall. Literally, because natives are savages, we don't have title to the land. Europeans who are fully human have the right of discovery to the land, so they're the true title holders. This is the ruling. That precedent and the doctrine of discovery get referenced by the Supreme Court in 1954, 1985, and most recently in 2005. My TEDx talk actually goes in depth into that 2005 case, laying it out almost point by point, helping people understand how it is one of the most white supremacist Supreme Court opinions written in my lifetime. And it was written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Right? Because when your land titles are based on the dehumanization of another group of people, this makes white supremacy a bipartisan value. This is the challenge we're having as a nation. So in 2016, we were misled. We thought we were having a debate on equality versus inequality, at racism versus anti-racism. We weren't. What we were debating was, did we want Donald Trump to make us explicitly racist, sexist, and white supremacists again, or did we want Hillary Clinton and the Democrats to work to keep our racism and white supremacy implicit? That was the debate we were having. Even today, when in Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump is adamant he wants to keep Confederate flags in place, and he wants to keep bases named after Confederate generals. Joe Biden says, well, we should probably put those things in a museum. But they both agree that our slave-owning presidents, like George Washington, still need to be honored. They both would agree that white supremacists and ethnic cleansing presidents like Abraham Lincoln, need to be maintained their status. And so there's not a whole big difference between the two. One saying keep them up, the other saying put them in a museum. But these other heroes of our national history who were slaveholders, who were white supremacists, who were ethnic cleansing, whoa, of course we need to honor those. Those are our heroes. There was another case with the Wampanoag tribe in Massachusetts. Last fall, in March or April, the Trump administration disestablished their reservation. Obama-Biden administration established a reservation for the Massachusetts for the Wampanoag in the state of Massachusetts in like 2011, 2010, I forget the exact date. And during the pandemic, the Trump administration disestablished that reservation. Now, there was a lot of uproar because the timing was incredibly unjust, right? Disestablishing a reservation during a global pandemic, that's like evicting someone from their apartment while there's a hurricane going through your town, right? It's an unjust timing of this, to do this. And it's even cruel to do it in the first place. But in his response, Joe Biden was talking about how he and President Obama were so great because they established this reservation. Now, what most people don't know is that tribes don't own their reservation lands. Those are lands held in trust for us by the U.S. government. This is why tribes struggle with a lot of impoverishment, because we have no capital. We don't own the lands where we have reservations. Those are lands held in trust. So we can't buy and sell them or even have them used. And Joe Biden, in an op-ed that he wrote, said one of the greatest responsibilities of the president of the U.S. government was to hold lands in trust for Native nations. He said, this is how you reestablish your sovereignty. Now imagine if he said that to any other nation, right? Imagine Joe Biden went to France and said, French people, let me tell you something. The best way for you to have relationships with the U.S. government is to let us hold your lands in trust for you. It's actually great for your sovereignty. He would never say that, correct?
Right.
But he said it to Native nations. Why? Because of the doctrine of discovery. So Joe Biden isn't saying you have rights to your lands. Joe Biden isn't saying you deserve to have sovereign decisions over your land. He's just saying I'll be a better landlord than Donald Trump will. You still won't have any rights. In fact, in the case just last week, McGirt versus Oklahoma, the United States Supreme Court literally stated that the U.S. Congress has the right to break treaties with Native tribes at any point they wish. All they have to do is muster the will to do so. This is the problem, and this is something that both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, the Democrats and the Republicans agree on. Native peoples have no agency over their lands. They are merely there at the grace and at the mercy of the United States Congress and the U.S. government.
Thank you, Mo. What I'd like to ask is now is if you were to get on the debate stage with Donald Trump and Joe Biden, is there anything specific that we might not have already talked about that you'd want to tell them on the stage?
I've actually been pondering my debate opportunities with both of them. And these are, I don't know, I'm trying to how to best answer that question. One of the things that I would bring out in that debate is that the foundations of the nation were written explicitly to protect white landowning men. Right? When in 1878, when you have a constitution that begins with the words, "We the people," and then Article 1, Section 2 never mentions women, specifically excludes natives, counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. In 1878, or in 1787, that literally leaves white men. That's who's left. And technically, it was only white landowning men who could vote. See, we don't think about this enough. The reason we have a constitution, the purpose it was written, was to protect white landowning men. That's why we have a constitution. So this helps us understand our history, right? So people act surprised that today women earn 70 to 80 cents to the dollar. This isn't surprising. Read our Constitution, it's working. People act outraged that our prisons are filled with people of color. Read our Constitution. We've never abolished slavery. This is why we have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world, and we incarcerate people of color at 3 to 5 times the rate we incarcerate white people. People get upset that in 2010, the Supreme Court sides with Citizens United and rules that corporations now have the same rights to political free speech as individuals. That is a ruling that opens the door for super PACs and their unlimited support for candidates. This isn't surprising. The Constitution's doing exactly what it's designed to do. It's protecting the interests of white landowning men. Our nation is becoming more and more diverse. And our problems are bubbling to the surface more and more frequently. They're becoming more visible on a daily, even on an annual basis. And both parties right now are telling us that the best people to solve these problems of systemic racism, sexism, and white supremacy are two white landowning men from the 1%. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's correct. And I think we have to help the nation understand how both of these men are not interested in actually addressing the foundational problems that we have. They are primarily interested in maintaining status quo. And so if we're going to get change, we have to listen to other voices. If we're going to get change, we have to go out the two-party system. If we really want to do something different, we need to elect somebody instead of a white landowning male from the 1%. And I would do a lot to highlight for people how similar Joe Biden and Donald Trump actually are. One may be more crass and one may be a bit nicer, but they actually hold very similar values, which is to maintain the status quo, which actually keeps their demographic in power.
Gotcha. Thank you. So let's talk about some more concerns. Our country has been fighting in the Middle East since the beginning of this century and even before that. So there's a lot of concerns, with the troops and bringing them home. What is your stance on our troops fighting overseas and bringing them back here, home?
See, we have to remember that we are a colonial nation. Our history is rooted in colonialism. And that has not only had huge ramifications for how we treat people of color and women within our nation, it helps us understand how we relate with the rest of the world outside of our national boundaries, especially nations that are not white. And so because we've never dealt with our history internally, we've obviously never dealt with it externally. And so just like I'm working to create a common memory and deal with our institutionalized white supremacy in our national policies, I want to create a similar common memory and deal with our white supremacy that gets exported internationally. And so one of the things I'm actually looking forward to most as President of the United States is I want to nominate a Native American as our Secretary of State. We've been sending, since the foundation, the beginnings of the nation of Israel, right, in the 40s and 50s, we've been sending white landowning men to that region to try and negotiate a 2,000-year-old land dispute between Israelis and Palestinians and Bedouins. And the people we've been sending can't even name the name of the tribe that was ethnically cleansed from the land where their own house sits. And yet we expect, and that was within the past 200 years, and we expect those people to go and settle a land dispute thousands of miles away that is thousands of years older. It's insane. It makes no sense. So if we're going to truly wrestle with our history, we have to understand how our history impacts the way that we relate with the rest of the world. And most of our military actions are deeply rooted in our colonialism. And so I want to decolonize and remove the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacy from our foundations. I want to decolonize and remove the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacy from our foreign policy. We have a lot to learn as a nation to be better global citizens. The world doesn't belong to white men, whether they're from Europe or the US. It doesn't. And we have to learn how to walk much more humbly in this world, understanding that the doctrine of discovery is false. It's wrong. The world doesn't exist for the exploitation and profit of white men. That's not what the purpose of the world is. And we have to learn how to be better global citizens and better neighbors. The United States of America is 5% of the world's population. And we consume a quarter of the world's renewable resources. The average American lifestyle is not globally sustainable. And it's dependent upon the oppression of other nations and peoples, both nationally and internationally. The American dream is not globally sustainable. The whole world can't live like we dream and want every American to live. That's not sustainable. So we have to understand how to reimagine our space, our citizenship in this globe that's going to require all of us to actually not put our own nations first, but to somehow find a way to cooperate and to coexist and to have an interdependency upon each other. And our policies, especially our foreign policies, do not reflect that.
All right, thank you.
That, again, this isn't a Democrat or Republican issue. This is an American issue.
Yes, sir. So, it doesn't take much right now, whether you go online, put the TV on and just go walk right outside. We're all dealing with COVID-19. As president, what would you have done if, this all had started and you were president and you had to move forward with it?
Yeah, when COVID-19 first hit back in March, I was one of the first campaigns, and it was actually just only by a few days, but we shut down our public campaign schedule before many of the other candidates did. And I came back, and with my family, I recognized we were in a global pandemic, and there was no vaccine. And the way our nation coped with that reality is our leaders told us that this was going to be a short-lived thing. If we can just hold out. There was at first a belief, well, we'll be back in school before the end of the spring semester. Summer will be back to normal. This is the way we coped with the global pandemic. Even though we knew this was an infectious disease and there was no vaccine, and the only way to keep yourself safe in that situation is to social distance and to wash your hands and wear face masks. And yet we coped, and our leadership told us to cope by telling us this was going to be short-lived. I actually told my daughters soon after their school shut down that I am quite certain you're not going to go back to school this spring, and I'm not even positive you're going to go back in the fall. We don't have a vaccine. believe it or not, Americans are not exceptional. We don't have some God-given immunity to global pandemics, as we're finding out right now. And the only way to keep yourself safe without a vaccine is to social distance, wash your hands, and wear a face mask. And so I began, again, preparing my family and telling my supporters, we need to understand that we are going to have a new normal for a long term. And while that may not have been a popular message back in March and April, but this is how you help a nation cope. By promising we're going to be back soon, where Trump is saying this is going to magically go away, or, no, it's not. We have to prepare for this. We have to not just physically prepare, we have to emotionally prepare for this. We're going on 6 months now of many people staying at home. And this is why we see these crises coming up, because people are psychologically at their wits' end right now. Not only is there great income insecurity, not only is there great housing insecurity or food insecurity or employment insecurity, but people are just tired of being at home. And we need leadership that isn't promising things are going to be okay in a day or two, or promising that everything's going to be all right. Are we, like right now, we have President Trump telling us that we're doing so great at testing. We're the best testers in the world. And yet, yes, I'm sure from his perspective we are, right? He's in the White House. He's President of the States. He can get a test whenever he wants it and get the results within minutes. Most Americans are now sitting in lines, whether it's in their cars or in hospitals, waiting for tests, not only to take them, but then waiting days, even weeks, to get the results back from their tests. And so we have leadership that is incredibly disconnected from the reality of everyday Americans. And that's not helping us cope. We have leadership that's ignoring science and the advice of medical professionals, and is making things like wearing face masks a political statement. Again, President Trump has the tendency to make everything personal. And so my leadership would have been very different. I would have been preparing our people immediately that this is going to be the new normal for 12 to 18 months. We have to cope and prepare for the long haul. Right? We've been in a global pandemic for 6 months now, almost 5 months. And Congress has only passed one stimulus package. Right? The 1% is doing great. Everyday Americans are losing their jobs, their unemployment, their health benefits, they're behind on their rent. And so these are the issues that we need to be dealing with, and we need to have a much, so I would have been, I will, when I become president, I will take the advice and I will lift up and amplify the voice of our medical and scientific communities about what we need to do. I will put forth a national plan and policies of what we need to do to deal with these. I will work with states to empower them to get on board with what the medical and scientific community is suggesting we do to deal with this pandemic. I will not allow this to turn into a political debate. And I will provide consistent messaging and visioning of what we need to do. Right now, our nation is in crisis, and people are insecure, and they're fearful, and they don't know what's going to happen next. And we don't need leadership that changes and is merely reacting to everything. We need leadership that has vision and understanding, and is able to stay on message and to project some sense of assurance that we're going to be with each other through this in the long haul. And right now, American people aren't feeling that from our government and from our agencies. We're not feeling that from our governors and from our Congress members. We're not feeling, most people don't think Congress understands. And why would they? Congress hasn't, their pay hasn't been affected, right? They're still getting paid every day, every month. Their constituents aren't. People are waiting for food stamps, they're waiting for, unemployment, they're waiting for some kind of rental assistance. Congress, they're still getting their paycheck just like normal. And so, yeah, we need leadership that understands the situation our American people are in, and that's able to empathize with that and deal with that urgently, and then provide a consistent message of how we're going to get through this and assure people that we're going to be in this together. We're not going to leave anyone stranded. That's what I would do as president. That's what I will do as president.
Yes, sir. We touched on this a little bit, but I definitely think I can combine the next few questions in one. So, we've talked a little bit about racial equality, and we know earlier this year about Mr. Aubrey and Mr. Brooks and Mr. Floyd. Just to remind viewers, Mr. Aubrey was jogging, and then there's the debate whether he was jogging, whether he was in a construction site. We've gone back and forth on that, but we all know that in the end, he was shot and killed. We know that regardless of your opinion on Mr. Floyd, whether he was a good guy, bad guy, we all know that, the cop did put his knee on his neck and he was killed. And Mr. Brooks, that was down in Atlanta. There was the scuffle with law enforcement, and he was shot and killed. So when it comes to racial equality, race relations, and law enforcement, just all in one, how can you improve that for us?
Well, first of all, I will acknowledge that these men weren't just killed, they were murdered.
Sir.
And so this was a murder. I've even gone as far as to call it a lynching by the state. And again, the challenges that we're facing is we do not have leadership that acknowledges what we're built on, that acknowledges the history of our nation, that defines to this day who we are. In our campaign, we're going through every week now and releasing new policies, and a few weeks ago we released our policy for our 100-day plan. And my plan for my first 100 days in office is I want to remove the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacist language from our Constitution. On my blog, on my website at markcharles2020.com, click on the blog and you'll see an article there I published, my 100-day plan. I have a draft of the Constitution, edited. I went through it with a strike-through font. And I'm not changing balance of powers, I'm not changing checks and balances, I'm not changing the order of succession or anything else. I'm literally going through there and I'm removing the racist, the sexist, and the white supremacist language. If you read our Constitution, you will find that there are 51 gender-specific male pronouns. 51 he, him, and his. If you read our Constitution, you'll find that there are many places where natives are excluded, or Africans are counted as 3/5. You'll find that we have a clause in the 13th Amendment that keeps slavery legal in prison. You'll find in both the 13th and 14th Amendment we set up the criminal justice system as a gatekeeper for civil rights. We have racism, sexism, and white supremacy littered throughout our Constitution. And I went through our Constitution and with a strike-through font, I removed all of those references. For gender-specific male pronouns, I replaced them with proper nouns or gender-neutral pronouns. The clause in the 13th Amendment, keeping slavery legal in prison, strike-through font. Let's just remove it. Never should have said that. The 3/5 compromise and all the exclusions in Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution or in the 14th Amendment, strike-through font. Let's just remove these things. Now the challenge is most Americans don't think our Constitution says these things anyway, right? They think our Constitution stands for equality and freedom. And most of them are surprised when they actually read it and realize how racist and sexist and white supremacist our Constitution actually is. So I'm actually I'm editing the Constitution to make it say what many Americans think it says already. Now, obviously, as president, I can't amend the Constitution. So in my first 100 days, actually the day of my inauguration, I intend to turn that draft over to the leaders of the House and the Senate, asking them to approve these as amendments to our Constitution, as edits to our Constitution. And then I would like to see them approved in Congress quickly and passed on to the states to be ratified. And I think within our first 100 days, we can actually remove the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacists from our foundation. Now, this isn't going to change things magically overnight. What it's going to do is it's going to give us the foundational level tools we need to actually make the legal and the judicial and the other modifications we have to make to ensure that we are a nation where we the people actually means all the people. Nothing's going to change overnight, but right now, like, we can't reform criminal justice and the policing until we abolish slavery, right? Had Bernie Sanders not suspended his campaign, had he been able to win the nomination of the Democratic Party, had he been able to get elected as president, and had he been able to pass Medicare for all, okay? If he had done all those things, and yet we did not remove the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacy from our foundations, what the result would have been is we would have had great universal health care for white men, and everyone else would have got a hodgepodge. Because that's the way distribution works in our racist and sexist and white supremacist systems. And so again, I'm the only candidate who's calling for these foundational level changes so that we can actually do the things we need to do to make our society more equal and equitable. But we first have to deal with the foundation. And I've studied this history, I've looked at our documents, I've read them, I've pondered them, I've thought about them. One of the other things I'm calling for, one of the primary planks of my platform, is that the United States of America needs a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. A conversation I would put on par with the truth and the reconciliation commissions that happened in South Africa and Rwanda and in Canada. I wouldn't call ours truth and reconciliation, though, because that word implies there was a previous harmony, and if you study the history, that's not true. I would call ours truth and conciliation, because conciliation is merely the mediation of a dispute. And I think we need this commission sooner rather than later. It's one of the primary planks of my platform, so that we can deal with our institutionalized and systemic racism, sexism, and white supremacy.
Okay. Well, we're almost at a time, Mark, so looks like you pretty much have touched on some of my final questions already, but if there's anything else you wanted to state on, say, the removing of Confederate statues, some people say, hey, that's our history, leave it alone. Some people say, no, it's racist, we have to take it down. And I know you did talk a little bit about, health insurance. I know it's two totally different topics, but was anything else you wanted to add on, say, the removal of certain statues, and any other thoughts you might have on how we can make healthcare more affordable, and just anything else you want to add before we close it out?
Yeah, so I would say two things regarding the statutes, and right, this is an important debate, and it's a debate we've had before. Now, removing Confederate flags and the honoring of Confederate generals, that's the low-hanging fruit, right? That's easy. Most of us, most Americans should be able to agree, yes, these are not honorable people, they are not honorable things, they're part of our history, but nothing we should be proud of. So I would agree, we need to remove those things, and not that we need to forget they happened, but we have to stop honoring them. We have to stop holding them up as this is some great piece of our history. No, this is a very regrettable, a very shameful piece of our history, and we should never forget we did those things, but let's stop holding them up like they're great. Now, by the same token, have you ever been to the Lincoln Memorial?
I have not.
So at the memorial, at the base of the memorial, there's a small museum. It's the size of a large classroom. And on each wall, there's plaques with quotes and sayings and statements by President Lincoln. On one wall, a wall dealing with his thoughts on the Union, is a plaque that states, "I would save the Union. My primary object in this struggle," wrote Abraham Lincoln, "is not to save or destroy slavery, it's to preserve the Union. If I could save the Union without freeing a single slave, I would do it. If I could save by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." There's a plaque hanging at the Lincoln Memorial that literally states, according to Abraham Lincoln, black lives don't matter. It's not hanging there to point out how wrong this thinking was. It's hanging there to point out how great Abraham Lincoln's love for the Union was, so much that he didn't give a crap about black lives. Again, if you study our history, Abraham Lincoln was a blatant white supremacist. He literally said there is a physical difference between the white and black race. I have no intention of making voters or jurors of black people or of allowing them to hold office or to intermarry. But as long as we have to remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior, and I, as well as any other man, wrote Abraham Lincoln, believe that the superior position belongs to the white race. He was a blatant white supremacist. After signing the Pacific Railway Act in 1862, Abraham Lincoln literally ethnically cleansed the Dakota and the other nations Native nations from the state of Minnesota. After the massacre at Sand Creek, he literally ethnically cleansed the Cheyenne and Arapaho from the state of Colorado. And after the Long Walk, he had removed and ethnically cleansed the Navajo and the Mescalero Apache from the territory of New Mexico. Literally one of the most genocidal presidents in our nation's history, and yet he has the grandest of all memorials on our national mall. This is literally akin to holding up someone like Adolf Hitler. So while I agree, yes, we have to have a robust debate and probably remove our honoring Confederate generals and Confederate flags and Confederate monuments, but I also say we have to have a very long and thoughtful debate about what do we do about these other blatant white supremacist leaders who were literally genocidal leaders. We have to discuss Abraham Lincoln. It is shameful that we hold him up as our greatest president. Absolutely shameful. And I promise you, had he not won the Civil War, actually not even that, his greatest accomplishment was the Civil War was a spat between the white supremacists North and South. They didn't care about black lives. They were just not sure what to do with black people. They both believed in the lie of white supremacy. That wasn't the debate. But that's not the main war that Abraham Lincoln won. The war he won was the War of Manifest Destiny. Had he not been able to remove the Cheyenne and Arapaho from Colorado, and the Dakota and the Winnebago from Minnesota, and the Navajo and the Mescalero Apache, had he not been able to move our nation so much more closer to completing Manifest Destiny, he would have been a forgotten president. And this is why we hold him up. Because he won that War of Manifest Destiny. Because he did ethnically cleanse those people. Because he found a way to institutionalize white supremacy and constitutionally protect slavery. This is why we honor him. So we need to have, yes, the Confederates are they're low-hanging fruit. This is an easy debate. Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, who owned and enslaved black people. Let's talk about those things. Let's remove those monuments. Then we're making some progress. Let's deal with the fact that the Declaration of Independence calls natives savages. Let's wrestle with that. But these are the things that both Donald Trump and Joe Biden agree are untouchable. And this is why I'm running for president. Now, in regards to Medicare for all, universal basic income, all of these social programs that the Democrats had a very robust debate on in the last primary. I just spoke about this in a live stream today on my campaign website where I talked about the economy. One of the ways that, and this isn't the only way, but one of the ways that they debated and discussed funding these sorts of social programs, especially these really expensive ones, was by taxing billionaires, right? Now, I said earlier that the American lifestyle, the American dream is not globally sustainable. It's not. The world cannot live like the average American. And the world definitely cannot live like the average billionaire. That's not sustainable. That amount of concentrated wealth and amount of exorbitant spending, consumption, is not globally sustainable. We can't live that way. And yet we hold that up as the goal of how Americans want to live, yet it's not sustainable. It will crush us. It will crush the global community, as it's already doing. And so the problem with having social programs that are dependent upon taxing billionaires, what that means is we still have to keep producing billionaires so that we can tax them. I would rather build an economy that doesn't produce billionaires. I stated in my live stream today that you cannot earn $1 billion. You can exploit your way to $1 billion. You can oppress your way to $1 billion. You can cheat your way to $1 billion. You cannot earn $1 billion. No one's time and effort is worth that much money. If you raise $1 billion for your corporation manufacturing some good, and your manufacturing requires that you have a sterile production site, and you pay your people who clean that room minimum wage and not even provide enough health care for them to live or money for them to live on, you didn't earn $1 billion. You might have made $1 billion, you didn't earn it. You cheated your way. You underpaid your employees so that you could maximize your profits. And so this is the challenge. We have to not just, yes, I think we need to have a very robust debate on Medicare for all, some kind of universal health care, some kind of universal basic income, some kind of universal child care, some kind of better way of educating our youth. We have to have all these discussions, but we have to talk about funding these things in a way that is not dependent upon maintaining this unsustainable economic system. And that's the deeper debate I'm trying to engage with my campaign. This is the conversations I want to have. We'll get to how we fund these things, but first let's change our economy so we stop producing these people that are not sustainable. We stop producing this class of people that our world cannot sustain.
All right.
I hope that's helpful.
No, definitely, Mark, definitely. Is there anything else you'd like to add? We got about 2 minutes left.
Yeah, for anyone who'd like to learn more about my campaign, I welcome you to go to our website, markcharles2020.com. You can follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on TikTok, we're on YouTube. We're very active on all of these platforms. We're actively working to get on the ballot or to have access as a write-in candidate in states around the country. People will be able to vote for us in 41 states, including the District of Columbia. We'll be a write-in candidate in about 38 states, and we should be on the ballot in 3 to 5 states. Unfortunately, we will not be able to be voted for in South Carolina because we were not able to. They did not have a remote petition filing system to get the signatures, and we didn't want to risk people's health to sign petitions to get me on the ballot in South Carolina, and so we were not able to get on the ballot there. So that's unfortunate. But we are still encouraging people to connect with our campaign because we are coming up with many ways that people can help us get into the White House through supporting our campaign, through helping publicize our campaign, even though you may not be able to vote for us in your state. But we'll definitely we're expecting that people in 41 states will be able to vote for us, which gives us access to more than enough electoral college votes to win the White House. You need 270 to win the White House.
Gotcha.
So.
All right, thank you. Mark Charles, the independent running for president, thank you so much for coming on our show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you. I enjoyed this conversation. I hope it was helpful for your listeners.
Definitely.
And I look forward to staying in contact.
Oh, absolutely. And now a word from our sponsors.
Technicians you can trust.
Quality you can count on.
I guarantee it.